Happy President's Day. I shouldn't be tired, but I'm tired. I didn't even have to work today. Today I had the day off. Got to sleep in a little bit. My daughter's at a holiday kind of camp. It was great. I actually slept a bunch yesterday and got a massage, and yet I'm tired today. I don't know what it is, but it is. It is what it is. Whoa, what did I do? Oh, that's not quite what I was looking for. So yeah, that's that. But hope everyone's having a good President's Day. I'm struggling, I think, to try to kind of get through this. I guess what am I calling it? A dungeon crawling module for Do Anything D6. Um, I've worked on it in some different ways in different streams, but different ways in previous streams. But what you're looking at here is the main tool I'm using for the writing part, not necessarily the laying out, but much like the do anything D6 core rules. For the moment, I'm just gonna give it out as kind of a plain document, and I will come back to do layout stuff later. This is using Scrivener, which I like a lot. I just like you can get kind of granular with how you're organizing stuff. It's got you basically is every piece of text, which can be a small thing or a big thing, essentially becomes a card. And then, so for example, if I come up to the whole draft, see all these cards, and then you can kind of break these out into, whoops, well, let's see, how do I break there? Maybe I gotta go in here is better, and I can come in here and see the cards. Oh, that's a different view. There we go. You can see different cards, and you can sort of slot things, move things around. So it's very easy. For example, if I've written a small piece and I realize, oh, I want it here instead of there, I want to move it around, I can really easily drag and move it around. You could even have potentially multiple. I haven't really played around with the fact of having multiple kind of drafts. I think I could do different things with. I just like the way it's organized for writing. It's definitely got some quirks. I haven't figured out the kind of the best sort of publishing workflow. It hasn't been a big deal for me because my whole thought is I'm going to take this into Affinity at some point and typeset it. So that the kind of typesetting thing I'm doing here is extremely, or I don't mind that it's very limited or quirky or whatever. Like it doesn't. I'm sure there are probably the Scrivener's been around a long time. I'm sure there are probably tutorials and things on how to kind of get up a more finished product out of it. But I don't know that people are. I don't think Scrivener is this sort of end to end tool for the kinds of products like a gaming manual. I think if you're writing a book or a book manuscript or a screenplay, I think Scrivener they have some things for that, but not the sort of more I don't know graphically intensive kinds of complicated kind of layouts that you tend to get with sort of ye old RPG zine. But uh, I'm not there yet, and I think one thing that, is nice is that this just helps me stay focused on the kind of what I'm trying to get out on the page and not so much in trying to balance columns, make it look pretty, all that jazzy jazz stuff. I have a lot of stuff that I'm sort of pulling in from multiple different sources. I do have stuff that we did in Ouija in the last couple streams. I'll be bringing that in, but that's kind of more kind of part 2. So there are 2 elements of this module, at least as I conceive it now. I may split them up if it seems like I'm getting stuck on one and the other one's kind of ready to go. Might split 'em up, but they're the 2 main portions. One is just kind of giving like Do Anything D6 was my attempt to give sort of a basic resolution framework. Hey, you need something you're not happy with your game has or it doesn't have one. You could drop this in and go. Great. And so the elements of this dungeon crawling module are basically similar, but for dungeon crawls. Really, again, not really trying to reinvent the wheel or anything, but sort of taking some of the things that I like or I use, maybe putting it kind of making it kind of in line with what Do Anything D6 is kind of doing, and saying here are these things. Like if you're running a dungeon and they either didn't give you like I don't know, like you grabbed it from a website or Dyson logo, something like that. And maybe it has some things room descriptions, but it doesn't have wandering creatures, doesn't have whatever, it just doesn't have everything you need. You could use this instead, right? It'll make some it'll have in there a basic framework for running a dungeon if whatever dungeon you have at hand doesn't have it or you don't like it, something like that. And then the second one was more about that kind of well, the other module which we worked more on in earlier streams was more about creating your own dungeon, kind of thinking through like what are dungeons like, that kind of dungeon creation, not necessarily generation in the sense that I don't know that I'm gonna have a bunch of tables to roll on, but more just thinking about processing these different elements of dungeon. So one of the things that I'm kind of the bit I'm working on here right now is I have a couple of concepts. So I've talked about it on stream before. This basically um, HD for for a dungeon, right? So if creatures have an HD, I want to give an HD for dungeons because I think we can use it. And I was walking around earlier, and I think one of the things that I'm trying to do with what I feel like is one of my kind of goals, maybe not the main goal, but kind of a sub goal, is to really give a bunch of hooks. And that as a referee or GM running these games, you can use as many or these little of these hooks as you want. So with this idea of the DEF CON level, right? We know you probably have heard of DEF CON. I think in '80s movies, probably like War Games and some movies like that. Kind of for me anyway, brought sort of this concept of DEF CON and the consciousness, but it's this rating system that I think the Department of Defense, I don't know, whoever uses to just determine how um, how desperate the situation is, or not even. I don't even think that's probably not the right word. It's more like how close are we to basically all out war kind of thing. So see, I was gonna put. Let me see if I can insert a image. Why? Yes, I do want to insert an image. Insert this. There we go. So we have this. There we go. So you're gonna have the DEF CON levels, right? And one is actually the worst. One is like thermonuclear war is a go. Five is normal. So I like the idea of having a similar thing for your dungeon. Starting off, and you could start, and the thing that you can do, of course, I'm going to start as describing. I'm going to start as if you're going from 5 to 1. Of course, based on whatever's going on, you could start at 3. It's all to be taken with whatever circumstances, context in your game. If the party's been causing all ruckus, whatever, then ends up at the dungeon, they've probably been forewarned. Maybe they're not going to start at DEF CON 5, which is basically business as usual. They're going to start at DEF CON 3, which is mobilizing and getting ready, kind of thing. Now, I think, let me see. There's a little table here. Maybe I could take a picture of it rather than, because I'm gonna use it as a basis, but I'm not really gonna get. Hold on, I'm not going to see. I'm not going to use it word for word, but I can start there. All right. So if we look at this table, what we see here is we have these different DEF CON levels, and they have the terms, I guess, is exercise. So starting with fade out, ending up at cocked pistol. But right, DEF CON 5, normal, lowest state of awareness. DEF CON 4, basically from DEF CON 4 up, it's essentially all the way up to like, oh yeah, nuclear war is imminent or has already begun. So DEF CON 1 is all out battle, whereas DEF CON 5 is basically business as usual, right? So let me just save this because I'll pull this in. That's from Wikipedia. So who knows? I can't say if it's absolutely correct, but it seems right. Throw that in there. There we go. Okay. So we got these DEF CON levels. And I've mentioned hooks before, right? I want to give you things that you can hook into, or me, myself, I'm using it. So what is it? So we have a few things, right? If we have these different levels of readiness from, business as usual. Basically, it's just another day in the dungeon to the war is on. Right? War is here, and we're getting ready for it. Then what we can do is we can play around with a whole bunch of stuff on not only what each of those levels looks like, but also when we escalate those levels, what does that look like? So you can start with, and there's a bunch of stuff, right? What do wandering monsters? What do our wandering monster creature checks look like at each of those DEF CON levels? You could do one thing is very easy. You just have a big table, and you could add the DEF CON levels, or you could add some multiple of them to your um, So your encounter tables. So you start off DEFCON level 5. You're getting something like, oh, like just people, the ordinary citizens and whatever, whatever. And maybe there's like a beat cop and maybe there's a traffic cop, something like that, right? Okay, DEFCON 4. All right, now you're getting a squad car, a couple of squad cars full of cops. People are scattering, so you're not going to see as many people. That, and then you get maybe DEFCON level 3. It's okay, bunches of cops. SWAT is showing up. Uh, you're getting more the command center type things. Right? You can see the escalation, almost like if you're playing. What was it in I remember in like the Grand Theft Autos, or I forget that other game that was a spoof of Grand Theft Auto, but I really loved playing it a lot. Can't remember the name of it, right? You'd see your stars or your badges or whatever, that alert level go up, and then as you get up to the higher levels, you're at 5 stars or whatever, then all of a sudden, like, things are going super crazy, right? So maybe one in our real life would be the two would be the National Guard shows up. Maybe the FBI also is rolling, and then one is, the army. The army's coming in. And I don't know what it would in real law enforcement would look like, but we can imagine what that kind of escalation type stuff is. But we can also think about in terms of our dungeons. What's happening in the dungeons? And this can apply also to pieces of a dungeon, because I think I mentioned, or maybe I did, this concept of looking at your dungeons and blocks. It doesn't have to be necessarily the levels. It can be, of course, but you might have something that's spread out over a single level. What different areas can have different things also. What happens if you're in a temple complex and this is happening? The necropolis is going up DEFCON levels. How does that relate to the rest of the dungeon? How does that relate to the things you're seeing in that necropolis? Maybe at the highest DEFCON level, like really nasty stuff is going to come up, but that's like the big bad. Maybe as a party, you need to get everything up to that DEFCON level, much like I think in sometimes in those video games, and they'll have that mission in uh in Grand Theft Auto, where you literally have to get the alert level way up because to do something or other. So you can see how you can start to play with these things a lot. Well, what do encounters look like at different DEFCON levels? What kind of things happen? Maybe if you go from 5 to 4, uh, then hey, then you hear alarm, like you can have environmental things. Well, from 5, which is business as usual, to 4, which is some kind of alert, that's when you start hearing alarm bells or horns or whatever thing they're using, people calling out, noises, whatever it is. They're basically saying like the alerts start to go off. Maybe you hear footsteps running. Maybe you hear whatever else is happening. Maybe doors will start to lock, close and lock, right? If you had a bunch of doors on the level, suddenly some of them in some places are now locking down. Ian says, reminds me of Persona 5 where the dungeon awareness level can keep going up. Yeah. I mean, I feel like 5 levels is probably good for my thing. I mean, you could probably keep going up. I mean, this one's counting down. So, and I was thinking maybe for flavor just to keep it as counting down, but it might make more sense to count up, though. I have some things that I had in mind that work actually with the 5 4 3 2 1. But yeah, you can look at it, right? You can, and you can just play with all this stuff, right? What happens environmentally if you have something like some kind of like ticking, you're sort of, I was thinking of calling them waves, but sort of your dungeon fronts, if you will. Different things can happen depending on these DEFCON levels. It doesn't have to necessarily be alarms being raided. What if you were in a dungeon that's sinking, or it's flooding? Maybe these can represent different flood levels of the dungeon, and they'll be somewhat dynamic. So if you're intent on giving people like a 3-hour window, this you don't probably don't want to use the DEFCON levels. You'll want to use just hours, because there's a lot of opportunity built into this. There's some of the, and I'll probably get into it in a minute. Some of the things that I'm doing with this are kind of give you some variables, and they will probably escalate more quickly as you go up. Um, and I'm pondering whether there should be, obviously, once you have this in your hand, you can do what you want. Some have a mechanic so they could go down, but it would be something like if you could stay out of sight for an hour, maybe you can go down one level, but you're not going to be able to go down more levels unless you actually leave the dungeon. Because I mean, it's one of those kind of silly things like the Metal Gears. I feel like it's, maybe I'd call it the Metal Gear Solid rule. Like if some guy's out there just shooting up your guys and then you don't see them for a couple minutes, you're not suddenly going to forget that there was some guy in there shooting it, right? You're not going to just shut down completely. Maybe you think, oh, they're gone, but you're probably at least going to be wary for some period of time until you can confirm they're gone. And while you're doing that, you're searching everywhere. So Not a lot of ways. I don't wanna have a lot of ways where you could game it to really go down very much because it just doesn't make sense without, multiple time passing. Maybe it's a weeks thing, like, oh, you can go down from DEFCON 1 to 2 in a day, but 2 to 3 takes longer and longer. So it really puts on a bit of a ticking clock on the party at large to you wanna get in, get what you wanna do, and knowing that if you leave, you're probably gonna have to be gone for a little while, or you're just gonna have to come back and they're already gonna be at some kind of readiness level, which makes sense to me anyway. Ian says, fun exercise for the dungeon adventure. What new opportunities open up for your players only after the DEF CON levels reach a certain point? Yeah, exactly. Like, what if something's only going to show up like the dragon? Like, there's a dragon in there, but he's hidden. You don't know where it is. Maybe at DEF CON 1, the dragon pops out. So, something you could do, which is certainly a trope, right? Is we got to make enough trouble for the big bad to show themselves. They're not going to show themselves unless we can really do something. So, we got to go in there and really muck it up. But then we have to survive in the dungeon and do whatever it needs to do until that DEF CON level reaches 1, at which point maybe the big bad shows themselves. So, yeah, I mean, and that's kinda my point, right, is you could use these to hook into all kinds of different things if you want, right? What happens to reaction rolls as you're going up? Oh, you meet someone in the dungeon and it's business as usual, maybe, oh, that's fine, but you meet them and this alert's going on, they might not be as friendly to you. There might be a more hostility, but it might be, maybe it's a factional thing. You can have what do different factions do in the dungeon. If there's a faction that wants, for example, if you had a tyrant and then some kind of uh, what would you call it, revolutionary sort of outfit, or usurpers or whatever, then if the level of the DEFCON's going up as far as the tyrant goes, and because that's his, it's his castle or his whatever, then these other folks who are against him may actually be more friendly now that you're causing trouble because this is just what they want. Maybe let's to get Ian back to Ian's point. Maybe they're like, yeah, we gotta get everybody, we gotta get everybody out, or we gotta get so much trouble that he'll have no choice but to come himself. What I feel like I'm just quoting Dune right there. Isn't that Dune, right? What they have to do, at least in the David Lynch movies, the whole concept of Beast Raban is kind of an idiot, and or he's just brute force, but he's hiding his failures from the Baron, so they have to make it so bad on Arrakis that the Baron has to show up. That would be that DEFCON level going up, right? And they know that when they get to DEFCON level 1, the Baron and the Emperor and all the houses are going to show up because it's gotten too bad for them to really be able to hide. Ooh, all right, I'm taking a sip of this is kind of like a, I don't know, lukewarm cappuccino for the working man. So one of the other concepts with this, so I was going to make a table. So let me go ahead and make a table here. If I can remember how to make a table, I think it's under. Okay, and I'm gonna need the tables here are not they're not super attractive by default. They'll do for my purposes now. But it's weird if I take off the table borders right now, then it just vanishes. I wish they had a little light outline, but maybe they don't want to confuse people. But it means that I have to keep the ugliness on, and then I will turn it off and just have the I'll use alternate row shading, but I just need to do it. I don't know what is that? I don't know. Okay. So I need the so what I was gonna do is I need the DEF CON level. No, not emphasis. You're not supposed to be oops. You're not supposed to be emphasized. No emphasis, just yeah, I want you to be you're gonna be that. And then so this one I have this other concept, which is the why is it making everything? I don't know why it's doing that. Dungeon. Ugh, you're hurting me right now. You are hurting me right now, Scrivener, with this lunacy. Well, Buster call, would that be done with fireballs or lightning bolts? Which one is where do you see Buster call? Is that one of these things in that table? No one was. I don't know. I don't know what a Buster call is, Frederick. You're gonna have to enlighten me on that one. Okay, so we've got. So remember, we're going backwards. So I need to make some more. I might need. No, I'm gonna need a third row. So I think I'm gonna need, but I'm gonna need. Apply that. 5, 4, 3. And I don't know why it's putting everything in. Don't want you in emphasis. Why are you doing that in emphasis? All right, no, no. Okay. And then this is going to be, oh, I need the dungeon pool. So the dungeon pool is 5, 4. I'm still in emphasis mode. So the pool. So let me go over this. Let me go over this. Let me go over this. I need to do that. No, I don't. Oh, you're hurting me. I don't want to do that. I just want to. This is what I hate to get. Um, to get bogged down into doing this kind of silliness where it's it won't let me. All right, I'm just gonna have to leave it there because it's gonna drive me nuts. So the idea of the pool. Let me go over the dungeon pool. The dungeon pool is every time a turn passes, right? So a dungeon turn. What are we talking about? 10 minutes. You're gonna add a die to the pool. If the party, I had some on my initial set of rules. Let me see. I might have had it on my phone here because I've taken notes in scattered places. Let me see if I have it handy. I believe it was if the party fails, if the party doesn't, if the party tries something and fails. I don't remember. I had a couple rules. We're basically adding dice to the pool. You add dice to the pool at least once a turn. So every 10 minutes, you're adding a die to the pool. Okay. So, but maybe more, or maybe it was if yeah, it might have been if the party fails and then they don't mitigate. 'Cause remember, from do anything d6, you can kind of have a conversation and you can do whatever. Well, really done with those things, then those will add to the pool also. So you're filling up this pool. Brian Smith says, "Don't forget to celebrate the world's presidents today with Larsa." I don't even know that reference, Brian Smith. You'll have to hit me to that. And then Frederick says, "The Society of Magic and Alchemy has a buster call for anyone who gets too close to the source of magic." I see. I'm not familiar with the Society of Magic and Alchemy, so that might be my problem right there. Okay, so you're building up this dungeon pool. At least putting other things aside, every turn you spend in the dungeon, adding one to the pool. So just imagine you're loading up dice, right? Okay, one die, two die. When your pool number matches the DEF CON level number. So this is a nice thing about starting high. So when you get to high, this is how it's gonna escalate, right? Because you're gonna have the most as the party, you're gonna have the most amount of latitude at 5. So either 5 turns, uh, or 5 thingamajigs, whatever consequences, but you're gonna get everything in between that you're gonna get up to 5. So you get 5, then you add whatever the HD for the dungeon is. Remember, HD is like for creatures, it's like for the dungeon. So 1 is essentially level 1, 2, level 2, whatever. So you would take 5 dice, you'd add at level 1 of of your kind of generic dungeon. So it's starting at level 1. Doesn't have to, but let's assume we're starting at level 1, you'd roll 6 dice. If you get 6s, you'll start setting off these DEF CON events. And you'll set them off for as many as you roll 6s. So if you roll 2 6s, you would roll 2 events. And those events can be pretty much whatever you want. That I would encourage you. And I'll put some. Maybe I'll even start the. I should probably put these on separate documents, but I won't. I'll just do them here. It can be kind of whatever you want. It could be a wandering creature showing up. Could be an environmental effect. Could be pretty much anything. Could be if you have a some kind of front, like there's you have some other plot thing going on, like maybe there's a competing party, and then they do that, then something is going to happen to them, or there's a faction in the dungeon, something that they're doing something right. The priests of the cult of Orcus who are, they're conducting their ritual. Maybe something happens with them, or some element of that happens. Whatever, it could be any number of things. But again, it's one of those hooks. You can use that to say, "Ooh, I got something I want to do here. I can do it here." Otherwise, it could just be, a wandering creature shows up if you don't have anything else, or it could be, combination. But you could have multiple of them happening at once, because you can have like bing, ba bing, ba bing. Smith says, "Buster Call, what y'all on about?" I'm not familiar. Like I said, I'm not familiar with Buster Calls. I keep thinking of Arrested Development, like Buster's done something. They claim that the strength of a Buster Call is equal to that of an entire nation's military. Interesting. I don't know, Frederick. Is this an anime? I really have no idea on Buster Call. Really don't. Um. All right. But I have something I wanted to put in this third column. I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to worry about it right now. So let's put in. Well, we can put some another. I do it as a table. Yeah, I'll do it as a table. We'll put another table here with. I don't know if I should have these so close together. Seems like it. There we go. So now we'll have. Why is it everything is emphasis now? Do not want emphasis. Just one big blitz of magic assault. But where are you getting this from, Frederick? That's the thing I'm not understanding. Where is this coming from? That's kind of what I want to know. Talking about DEF CON, that is a DEF CON 1 response. Yeah, but in what? Frederick, you're not telling me what it is. I mean, you told me the name of it is Society of Magic and Alchemy, but what is that? What is I don't even know what that thing is. So I need more context. I don't know what that is. I don't know how to get it. This is just where no style. I guess I got to do no style. Oh, how about just no style? No style. There we go. Brian Smith says their OCD wants you to be 6. Yeah, I know. I thought about, Brian Smith, I thought about having DEF CON 0, which maybe I could still have, which would be just, I'm not sure what would happen at DEF CON 0, but it would have to be something kind of loony. Maybe just what would or either, because I mean, either you could go I mean, it could be 6-1 or 5-0. But if basically DEF CON 1 is already essentially the war to end all wars, right? Its existential crisis has begun. Then what would DEF CON 0 be? Just be like, that's it. I mean, I guess you could have it that maybe I'll put a note in here because it would be interesting. Oh, you know what? I didn't do this right. I didn't do this right. Um, Maybe I will put a 0 in there, actually. Let me add another cell. Let's do this. And all right, we'll put meaning. Oh, it's still going to do this. You're still going to make everything emphasized. All right, let's. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then this will be, all right. Oh, you know what? Whoops. Oh, yeah, 0. Right now, I'll put zeros. 0, 0, 0. Oh, actually, I'm going to get rid of these so I don't need it. And then this. I'm going to go here. I'm going to turn those note style. It just doesn't want to let me out of that. There's got to be something that's just like, just get rid of anything. Yeah, spreadsheets galore. The sauce of my deranged mind. Hey, don't blame me for what was for don't blame me for either Buster Call or DEF CON going to 5. That's just how it works. But I like the idea of 0, which is basically destruction or something like that. We would put at just maybe something like that would work for the meaning. So DEF CON 5 is just yeah, business as usual. On 4, maybe alerted, and wary. Oh, you're gonna keep making me do this one by one. You're gonna drive me nuts, nuts, nuts. Hey, Terrence. I'm working my way through some of my do anything D6 dungeon crawling module, and essentially we're going through DEF CON levels. Concept of essentially when we can adjust how alert or defensive or hostile the dungeon is against the party. Frederick says a group of idiots tried to wake the sleeping god and almost succeeded. It was enough to cause a week of no magic. So I'm guessing this is from. Oh wait, hold on. There's another. Society of Magic and Alchemy are the guardians and police of magic. They work to protect magic. In the past, there was a week of no magic. I see. But what is this from, Frederick? Is that I still don't think I've seen. Is there an anime? What is it? Anime, manga? What is this? Where are we getting the Society of what is it called? Society of Magic and Alchemy. Never heard of it before. Brian Smith's got the Metal Gear Solid type alerts. Yeah, same one, right? There's a Metal Gear Solid had an alert system. So did Grand Theft Auto. Uh, and there was that other game I really liked, which started off as basically a spoof of Grand Theft Auto, but they made a bunch of sequels to that one too. And I can't remember the name of it now though. But it was also fun. Yeah, and they had something like stars or badges or something to show just how wacky wacky it was. Oh, it's from Astara and the Black Company. Oh, I see, Frederick. So this is your own creation. I see. It reminds me a little bit, Frederick, of the TWA or TVA and Loki, right? TVA, Time, whatever agency. I think it's TVA. Seem kind of similar to that. Oh, I like that. I like yeah, searching. I like that. Yeah. Alert and wary, defenses raised. Ugh. Yeah, so I'll have to go over these because I'm not sure. Some of these I might want to put together because I think defenses raised and actively searching would go together. Maybe this would actually be over here. Defenses raised. Actively, yep. Maybe actively searching would go one up. Um, Actively searching. Anyway, we'll have to might need to I'll have to tweak these out. But I think we're getting the concepts here, right? Because the meaning it's not even actually the biggest the really through the pool and then the sort of number of events, which I suppose I should put in here. Actually, I think I might need another. So we have basically events. I should put this events before let's see, escalation. And essentially it's the same, right? It's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then NA. Or actually, there's I'm gonna have to put a 0 as a special case. You don't really get there through can't really get there from 1. That would be something. Brian Smith says defense race can see as like locking doors seems like one level less involved in organizing. Okay. Yeah, that's why I have it here. Right. One is business as usual. So the first level, right? This is your business as usual. No diving board in the dungeon pool. Basically, the dungeon pool is a dice you're going to build up. If you were playing in person, Brian Smith, imagine having a teacup or just a bowl on the table. I mean, you could have it on the table, and you can even show the players, right? And you're just adding die every time a round passes, every time certain things happen, you dropping a die into that pool, and when it fills up to the DEFCON number, you'll add the HD whatever the HD dice of the dungeon is. So let's say it's 1, you would add 1, you take those 6 dice and you would roll them. And then depending on how many 6s you rolled, you would have a list of events for that DEFCON level. And then when you got to the last 5th event or 6th event, I guess. No. On the 5th, I think it's really what I might here is on the 5th event, you would do that one and then you would escalate, which means that DEFCON level would rise. So at DEFCON level 5, some combination of 5 things would take place. On the 5th thing, you would you'd escalate. And then whatever, if you had an event in mind on these escalations, if you had a certain event that would happen, right? So if you had something like, hey, on DEFCON, if you had an escalation trigger, okay, so like on going from going from 3 to 2, something's going to happen. The VIPs are going to leave, the dragon's going to come out, whatever it is, then you would do those obviously as well. The timer, yes. So the timer is both actual time, or I should say dungeon time. In other words, every round you would drop 1 die in. So every 10 minutes of searching, whatever they're doing, you're dropping 1 in, and then potentially you could drop them in for other things, like if they got into a combat, or if they had some kind of noise type event that would drop another die in, right? So it would not. It could be faster than a clock. It could be if they're doing everything really slick and they're staying out of trouble and they're being sneaky and they're not failing really poorly at stuff and whatever, then they might get 6 before you roll the dice. And then you go through those events because obviously not all the dice are going to roll 6s. They may get lucky and get no 6s, in which case things are still kind of all right. Of course, it could go poorly. And then these wouldn't be the only ways you could escalate, right? Obviously, this is supposed to be a tool amongst many. So if they run into a bunch of guards, get into a fight, and 3 of the guards run away, it's going to escalate. That's what's going to happen, right? So it's not meant to be it is meant to work within the context of the fiction. But if all other things are being equal, then this is how it'll work. But obviously, instant escalation could happen from a number of things. Brian Smith asks, "Is a de-escalation mechanic out of scope?" I wouldn't say it's out of scope, but I personally, you're thinking very. I don't want it to be something that can be hyper gamed a lot because I just don't think it makes sense. Right? If imagine, and I don't want to use a modern example, but right, when think about what happens when there is just reports of something nasty going on at a public place. They don't just like drop off after like 10 minutes, right? Usually it's a day or it's a long time, and that's assuming that with our modern tools and everything, we will quickly get an understanding of okay, whatever the thing is, it's either it's been handled or it's left the premises and it's traveling, right? But it's not something you're like, oh look, we spend 10 minutes in a closet. Suddenly they forget we're here. Like that's the kind of Metal Gear stuff that I don't want to put in here. Is that idea of like, oh, I'm just gonna be quiet for a minute, and because they don't find me, even though I've killed eight of the guys, but they didn't find me for 5 minutes. So now they're like back to normal. Like, I don't want that. So there might be, I've debated back and forth whether to have some kind of de-escalation or if it's just time. Hey, if you're at DEF CON 1, you're not coming down for a while. If you're at DEF CON 2, something like that. Where it's like days, or you could even do it like a week or multiple weeks, depending. I might have something like that. Maybe if you're going from like business as usual to alert and wary, maybe you might drop down after a day or like a couple hours. If it's like, okay, it looks like they let like whatever, maybe you would, but it's not going to be. I don't want to be like a yin yanging, and I want the party to, I want the party outside of, particularly maybe powerful magics or items or things like that to be able to really monkey with that too much. It's really a bit of a, I think part of the goal is to kind of push the party to really treat delving in the dungeon kind of like that heist type thing. Is you are on a limited window. You need to get in, find what you want and kind of and sort of push out and not but just understanding clearing it out like it's gonna we're just gonna like go every room, then this system is probably not what you want to use because this system is it's gonna be harder they go into until they get to a point where just the population's been exhausted, which you could also have there too. Like, yeah, like, you've murdered everybody or dealt with them. So then they're out kind of thing, which is also a good way to do it. And of course, you might get to rolling reactions and things at certain levels. Like you might be, if you're under attack, that reactions are rolled and people are just going to flee or creatures just going to be like, I'm out and get out of here, which might actually work to the party's, benefit, depending. You can figure out some different things to do. Of course, these are all tools for you to use, right? So you can do, do different things or just not use this element because you could totally use other parts of this without using the DEF CON stuff if you don't want to. Perkins says, "Sounds like a mechanic to avoid DM fiat." Yes, it will. It will definitely like if you use something. If you use this, then yeah, as you're waiting, you're waiting for these triggers. Now, some of it obviously you can, and I think you ought to use your referee judgment, right? So if you're at DEF CON 5, which is normal, business as usual, the party goes and attacks some guards, and one or two guards escape. They're going to raise the alert, right? I'm not going to be like, oh, roll a die. Like I just be like, yeah, that makes sense. If they escape, the party can't run them down before they start clattering their shield together or blowing a horn or getting to some emergency pulley rope or ringing a bell, then that's going to do it, right? But that's something that should be kind of built in, which is why I always like to have my guards and things have things like a horn or some kind of calling mechanisms specifically so they can do that, so that when they're running and they're putting the horn, the lips, that it's like it's not something I'm just pulling out of my butt. But that's going to depend on the dungeon. Some dungeons that are more complexes with multiple factions in there, and you're fighting like a giant slug, then that giant slug escaping obviously doesn't do anything, right? So it's all there's going to be some judgment involved. But yeah, I mean, this is meant to give you a framework for I can plug these things in here, and then I can kind of let just run the mechanical parts of it, and it'll hopefully create some interesting situations. Brian Smith says, I've written a dungeon that was a wastable version of this. Basically, the dungeon just had a normal and alert state, just affects the number of enemies and types in search parties. Yep. I mean, that's another thing you do, right? You can change as the DEF CON levels change. I'm kind of inviting you to do things like have different encounter lists. I mean, a lot of this is going to depend on how much prep you want to do. You can run it and just not have it like Brian Smith says, just add numbers. DEF CON level 1, instead of running into 4 goblins, you can run to 8 goblins, whatever it is, right? That's a totally a fine way. Like that's the thing. Like I want you to be able to take this stuff and just have them as tools. And then if you're like in this dungeon, it makes sense for this. It doesn't make sense that the giant rats are going to care, but the giant rats might kind of not be out running around the hallways if it's crazy town because there's a running fight on. So maybe at DEF CON level 2 or 3 or whatever, where it starts to get really bad, some of those kind of vermin creatures are just going to stay out of the way. They're going to wait for the aftermath so they can eat the bodies, and that's where they'll get their fun from. But they're going to just stay out of the way. And this is system's kind of inviting you, I hope, to do that sort of thing. Is to take these hooks and say, "Oh, I got this." That's what I always liked about Bloody. The bloodied in fourth edition, right? They had this condition which was bloodied, which was you're down to half your hit points. I think it was half your hit points. You would become bloodied, and it didn't really do much. But then just by having that there to say you became bloodied or a creature became bloodied, suddenly you could have all kinds of abilities, effects, things that all could trigger on whether you're bloody or not, or if you became blooded, you could do that. And I thought it was neat. I didn't always love what they did with it, but I thought that's a really kind of cool thing. One, it's a visual bit of like, oh, you've made me bleed my own blood kind of thing. But it also was this hook of now, okay, if I'm a barbarian, maybe something cool happens when I get that bloodied condition. Or if I'm a creature and maybe I'm unintelligent, maybe I'm going to do something different. Like once my first target becomes bloodied, then that's kind of like blood in the water or in the air or whatever. And now suddenly that creature is just going to attack that one character because they've got that right. So it's like a neat thing, and that's kind of what I'm doing. Try to here is give you these hooks, give you these statuses and conditions that you can then take and say, okay, cool. So now I have this sort of it's not going to be quite there's some flexibility or some dynamicism of when these things fire off, and then like oh I can say oh in this situation, DEF cons are going to mean the site's deteriorating. In another situation, it's going to mean threat levels are being raised. In another situation, it's going to be something else. But I can kind of use all these different things to then create this kind of machine of my dungeon that's hopefully in a usable or easy to run kind of way. Perkins says drums in the dark, indeed. Oh, Brian Smith just listened to the Bandy Keeps podcast about it. I didn't realize that he podcasted about Bloodied. Yeah, that was a neat. That was I like that from 440. Yeah, that's another thing that I'm always always think about. Well, why did they choose X, Y, and Z to bring in from fourth edition, but not that? But yeah, the Bloodied condition was cool, and I still like to use it. I would use it in my games. Like, oh, like it's bloodied. Like you don't get a really. It's great because it's cinematic in a sense, but it doesn't tell you a whole lot. But it tells you like, okay, we've done some work, which I think sometimes can be nice when you're sometimes with monsters, especially just as you're narrating blow to blow. You might not. It's a nice reminder to kind of say something about well, what is their condition, especially something like in D&D classically, right? Your how much damage something's taken doesn't have to be. You're not getting 1,000 cuts potentially, depending. You could just be just whatever. So this is your. I like that little reminder of like, oh, you've gotten this creature down to half hit points. Maybe I should narrate a little bit of what's happened. Like they're a little bit more tired, or you see their guard slipping, or they're sweating, or they do have a little cut, or whatever it is going on. And then, like I said, you could have events that fire off because they've gotten bloodied. So, or they've bloodied something. So it was cool. Brian Smith says that Daniel was chatting about in the olden days it would make werewolves fight harder and then get weak, like a kind of limit break. Ah, I see. Okay. I'll have to go back. I'll have to go back and listen. I have not been good on the podcasting front in terms of listening. Um, Daniel's very good about listening to a bunch of different podcasts. And there's a lot of good podcasts out there. I just have not gotten around. I've not gotten around to it. I don't know why. I don't know why. Because I like listening to podcasts. And I listen to them a lot. Like if I'm driving up to up country to Studio B, I will pretty much put podcasts on the entire way. But for some reason, it hasn't normally been gaming podcasts. Actually, there was a time a long time ago when I did listen to gaming podcasts, and I kind of put them down. Maybe it's when I started doing this, started getting less energy to listen to gaming pods. There might be another one of those. I might do a podcast with Daniel, and either this week. I don't know when they would come out. It depends because I think we have enough absences that we want. I think he has to be in town anyway, and then I'm here, so we might get together and do something. I was playing the podcast at 2 times speed. Does that help? It's the I love the Tolkien professor, but he was someone I could probably listen to on 2 times speed. Um, he is someone who it's funny. I really love him, but my wife and my mother-in-law were giving him grief through me because he definitely does have a certain way that he speaks, a certain cadence, and he has a lot of like breathing noises and things. I always feel it's like I'm bad with the breathing noise, but I think he's probably worse than me. And it just made me think like, man, I don't know if though something. They just kind of made me aware of some of his sort of foibles as a speaker, and it makes me think about my own foibles, of which I know there are many. And then two, made me think about because he does so much audio video stuff of if it would be worth, for him and certainly for other people of getting a little taking a class or getting a having somebody come in and try to help them with their speaking game. Oh, Daniel talks so dang fast normally. I don't does he? I feel like I think I talk too quickly. That's probably another thing. I think I would benefit from slowing down. All right, so do we need to close the loop on these meanings? I mean, I'll go through here again. What is DEFCON 2 in the real? It's next step to nuclear war. All right, so this is let's see, preparing for all out battle. Can I do this without hitting you? I can. No style. Oh yeah. Ian does sometimes put up his podcast at 2 times speed. That's funny. I do like that you can do that. Or cut out the spaces, cut out the pauses. I think I might do that to the Tolkien Professors pod, is I might cut out the spaces, but I can't remember. But these are the things that I think is great. These sort of quality of life. I don't know if they're really AI type things and machine learning, or if it's just analyzing the wave forms. I guess you don't really need machine learning just to cut out pauses. But then I find really helpful sometimes. Okay, so we've got business as usual, preparing for all out battle, and then it's just conducting all out battle. But I might put this might be I might have to add in a little reaction thing because I think some of these right could because I could see these. Shoot, I think can I put in another? See, this is where the unfortunately the primitive nature of Scrivener with tables, and I don't know why things don't do better jobs with tables. So I want to, because I'm thinking now that I'd like to have an offensive and defensive, because I think, well, I guess you know what I'll do. I'll just put them in alert. So I want to have basically two. So right, it's alert and wary. Defense is raised, or because I basically I think you could do a reaction roll here, or have it just in the context of are they because not everyone, not everywhere is going to want to do all out battles. It might be we're evacuating, right? So I think I think I want to give both options because I want folks to think about that if they're not in terms of you're raising defenses, which I guess is not necessarily. I think you do either way, but then you're either readying. What would it be? Readying armed response, or you're preparing to evacuate. Perkins says having perception blurbs to give players awareness of escalation levels will be useful. Yeah, I mean that's yes, that would come in into these kind of events. Well, I don't have it here, but basically you have events leading up to when they would escalate, and then you would also have the what I would call what have I been calling them? I call them like you're probably have to come up with some different names. So there's during and a certain DEF CON you would have some events, which I was going to write up here, and then got sidetracked. Let me see. But that would be one. And then so then you could have stuff here. This could be like a wandering creature, and doing that? Why? Why are you doing that to me? See, a wandering creature, an environmental effect. I don't know. I don't know if I even have 6. I had to think about them. But basically, every time your level goes up, there's some kind of escalation. Maybe I should put the up here. Right. Oh, that's what it is. It's all coming from this because everything's at that emphasized. Now I understand. I think. So every time a dungeons DEFCON level, let's see, what's the word? Escalate. I know I just been using escalate. What's another word for escalate? I don't want to use rises because the number is actually going down. Worsens. There is an accompanying escalation event. I will maybe come up with some better names, right? The escalation event is the let's see. Is the what would it be? Every time a dungeon DEFCON level worsens, there's an accompanying escalation. Escalation event is I don't know. It's visible. I don't want to use visible because it might not be your actual sign. Anyway, it's is the what is the word? I don't know. Anyway, observable. I don't know. I'm just gonna put observable here because I'm just getting mind blocked. Intensifies. That's a good one. Thank you. Yeah, intensifies. Worsens is good, but I like and I'll use intensifies later on. But thank you, no one. No one has helped me. Okay, every time a definition level worsens, there's an accompanying escalating event. The escalating event is the sensical. What do you say if you can be sensed? It is the I don't know, is the blah, 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 how's Anne? I don't know. And a verbal phenomenon signifies the perceived perception. Yeah, perceptible, maybe. Thank you. Signifies the change in the dungeon. I'll probably have to come back and tweak that away. But you get my I think you can get my drift from that. Ooh, vigilance. Terrence, ever vigilant. So every time a dungeon's DEFCON level worsens, there's an accompanying escalating event. The escalating event is did I spell perceptible wrong? I must have. Yep. Is a perceptible phenomenon such as alarm bells or a quaking of the ground, such as alarm bells, a quaking of the ground. What else could it be? A rise or fall of temperature that signifies the change. Okay, I should probably move this actually. That is really maybe more here. All right. Does that make sense? Oh yeah, starts alarm bells. Sure. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll make a list. Oops. But yeah, that would absolutely. I mean, it could be more than that. It doesn't have to be just a sensory thing. It could absolutely be something like it can be as oops. It can be, it could be something, physical, can be, physical or sensory in nature. What, on the context of the dungeon and what the DEFCON levels signify in that signify there. Examples include, yes, show me some examples. So yeah, alarm bells ringing, mustering of troops, uh, tremors or quakes, flooding passages. Right. It could be anything. Could be particular uh monsters showing up. It could be whatever it is. Like the DEFCON level, I mean, we've been dealing with it mostly thinking about the kind of military thing, but it doesn't have to be. It could also be that it's that ticking clock, right? And we can decide, well, what does it mean to get to DEFCON level 5? Maybe it means that the entire complex has sunk into the water, right? This is a like Doom of Atlantis kind of thing. You're in Atlantis, you're trying to get something out before the place sinks. And DEFCON level, getting to DEFCON level 1 would basically be, yeah, it's pretty much sunk. And DEFCON level 0 would be like it's at the bottom of the ocean. You're gone. If you're still there, you're toast, kind of thing. Or it could be if you were assaulting a castle or somewhere with that's more organized. It might be mustard. I mean, it could be, and I think that you can be as it can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. So you could imagine in a dungeon with multiple factions, when the general dungeon DEFCON level is worsening, you can think about what different factions do. Maybe faction A are more militant and they're preparing for war. Faction B are not, so they're trying to leave. And this is where you can hook into things like reaction rolls or morale or whatever to think about. Okay, well, how how are these different people and their attitudes, these different cultures, these different groups, the different attitudes they have? How is that playing into these different levels of worsening conditions? Some might be trying to take advantage. Some might turn into allies. Some allies might turn into enemies if they realize things are going too far or whatever, right? So I want folks to really just take it and kind of like, oh yeah, I can just use this as a tool to help trigger certain things, and that way I kind of organize my dungeon. Maybe I can like a little worksheet. I can have these things written out. Hey, at DEFCON level, I mean, we're in a temple that's by the side of a volcano. But as the DEFCON level worsens, that's the volcano erupting. If the party doesn't get and do the thing that's going to stop the volcano from erupting before you get to DEFCON 1, then it's erupting. And then maybe they can still get out DEFCON 1, but if you get down to DEFCON 0, that means that the temple has fallen into the volcano and it's all over. And in each one of those levels, you can have different factions. Oh, the priests are going to be doing this. The other government people are going to be doing that. These other, maybe the weird, strange, or evil cult that's happening beneath the scenes, they're going to be doing this other thing. And you can just, but you can have them all, you can try to organize in terms of, okay, when it hits this DEFCON level, I can just check to see, oh, faction 1, 2, and 3, what are they doing? And I can kind of keep an eye on it, even if it's some of it's just for my brain. Maybe I don't have to go and do a bunch of stuff, but now it's like, oh, okay, at DEFCON level 3, the military are going to be super antagonistic, but the priests are going to be really helpful because now they're like, oh gosh, the thing we didn't think was going to happen is now happening. So now we need your help. I think, right? You could make that a note. You could make it very right. You can do a bunch of work with that, or you can do very little or no work with it, or it might just affect how often you're doing something else. But it's kind of there for you. It's there for you. And this is just water that used to have ice in it, but now no longer has ice in it. As I have finished my coffee. Goodbye, coffee. Okay, so we've got and then so there's a couple things. So each time you fill up the pool, so we have this dungeon pool. We're going to fill up the pool with dice. The higher or the lower your DEFCON level, the one the more at normal your DEFCON level is, the more dice you can fill that pool with before you have to roll it. When you roll the dice, each time you roll 6, you can roll an event. And I was going to come up with some events. I don't I'm not really specific, but just kind of um, let's see, just sort of generic events. I'm not sure though what that could be. Maybe we've got environmental effect, because that could be things like doors opening, closing, fires being lit, fires being put out, people being quiet, people on a creature. Hey, Goofgunk Gaming, happy President's Day. Absolutely. Wonder what I don't know. I might need to come back to this one because I'm not certain what other things there might be. Environmental effects awfully broad. Maybe if I'll come back to it because it's not. I always want to give people help, little aids, because goodness knows we're inspiration. Then we kind of run out of inspiration, and having some kind of table to roll on is nice, but something's not immediately coming to mind with this one. Um, so I might have to put it aside because I don't want to get too stuck. Let's see. I didn't write anything about the pool. Would probably be back here somewhere. So every dungeon turn that passes, add 1 die to the dungeon pool. When the number of dice in the dungeon pool match or exceed the DEFCON number, add the dungeon's HD and roll all the dice. For every 6, trigger a DEFCON event and mark it off the DEFCON level and mark it. Yeah, and mark it. I guess I should say when the number of events that have transpired match or exceed the DEFCON number, escalate the DEFCON level and trigger the DEFCON level. I think in the next paragraph, I've got about every time. Right. I will, like I said, I will probably have to rewrite this. Every dungeon turn that passes, add 1 die to the dungeon pool. Like I said, I'm going to add a couple other things that could happen that could also add dice, but that's your default way. When the number of dice in dungeon pool when the number of dice matches or exceeds the DEFCON number, add the dungeon's HD and roll all the dice. For every 6 rolled, Trigger a DEF CON event and mark it. When the number of events that have transpired at that DEF CON level, because you're not starting from scratch, right? So if you do 5 events at level 5 DEF CON, those don't count towards your DEF CON level 4. You gotta reset. So, and in terms of what can happen escalation event, almost like I think these are all good alarm bells, mustering troops, but I want to. I probably have to include some other ones because I want it to be really could be like I said anything you got, but I think probably is good. Maybe I'll have to put another note about probably what DEF CON level means because here I do kind of I'm using the word DEF CON and that does have a military connotation, but I want to make sure that DEF CON doesn't have to just relate to military readiness. It could relate to just a worsening of conditions or an intensifying, as no one pointed out, of conditions. Perkins says they were using a hex flower for a city escalation with 3 factions to produce events, sort of a faction weather. That's cool. I like hex flowers. I feel like sometimes hex flowers get overdone. I know there are a couple of people who just love to do everything in a hex flower. I don't always feel like a hex flower is the best choice. But that said, I think it's all like I like hex flower stuff. Um, and I think it can do some neat things. I mean, yeah, I think to Perkins says they wanted to do something outside their full control that the players could influence, but happen regardless. And that's kind of similar, I think, to this, right? And I think I really like those elements. It reminds me of what I like a lot, or what I've always enjoyed in some of the video games that have basically almost like a no player mode, or where you could kind of just like this is what I liked about the Sims, or like a Sim City, or those kind of sim type games where you could set things up, essentially hit the button and then things just kind of happening. And I think maybe I'm translating that a little bit back to these because I want to give these systems, and of course I'm setting everything up, but I can do all that and then I can just kind of hit the button, so to speak. And now, granted, in a tabletop game, I don't have it automated, but in a sense, it's like, wow, okay, this is happening. Maybe in a certain situation, the DEF CON levels will go, they'll go really fast. Maybe they'll go really slow. All these different things can happen or they're not happen. But I think you can have that idea of the loss of control is like, yeah, it's not me, it's the dice. I think it does make it more fun, and then to me it it increases that sense of your role as kind of the interpreter of what's happening, as opposed to the I'm saying what happens. Like, really, I'm just interpreting what all the stuff's given to me. And yeah, I always really like those aspects of different generation systems. Now, granted, it can run amok, and you have to try to make sure that you can make sense of it and do all uh, the work to kind of make everything fit together. Because sometimes you can get really wackadoo, kind of nonsensical type results if you just drop them straight in. You don't do that interpretation part, but I think the interpretation part's a lot of fun. Terrence says, "I'm still not sure how hex flowers work. They can work different ways, Terrence. I don't think there's one to work because I know there's different patterns of depending on how the hex flowers work. It's just another way of really just doing the probability kind of thing." Perkins said they only rolled in the hex flower once per session to set a background mood for the city. That's cool. Yeah, I like those kinds of things. I like that's what I always liked about using stuff like what's those oracle, just oracles and things like that, because it's kind of a similar type thing. Is you can roll an oracular sort of um I forget in what it is in Mythic. There's one where it just gives you a bunch of like a whole bunch of potential subjects and actions and reactions and whatever. And you can put together a neat little, but it reads like a weird prophetic, fortune cookie kind of thing, where it doesn't sometimes they can make very little sense, sometimes they'll weirdly make really perfect sense, but then you trying to figure out like, well, what does that mean for this? I always think it's fun, and I always felt like really good stuff came from it when I had time to think about it and go like, oh yeah, that does kind of make sense, or oh, interesting, what could that mean? And then playing that in and things like, yeah, like setting I always liked trying to do that for when the party had been away from a place for a while. They have their home kind of town, and then they'll leave for weeks. And I like to do that, like between when they leave and when they come back, roll something to say, like, well, what's happened? What's happened since they were gone? What's gone on? And I think it's a nice way to shake things up and show that no, the world's moving, things are happening, and just because you're not there at the town doesn't mean the town's just sitting there waiting for you. And those kinds of events are great for that stuff. Hey, Deathcap, how are you? Okay, I need to make a note here. I suppose I'll just make a note here. Well, yeah. Let's see. In our usage, DEFCON levels can refer to military preparedness, but can also refer to a an intensifying, worsening, or other escalating uh, change in the dungeon environment brought about by the interactions of the party. Let's see. Perkins says Drive Through RPG is a cheap PDF Hexflower cookbook that explains how to create your own. I think I looked at that once. I might have done something. I know I looked at least one of Goblin Henchman's Hexflower things. I don't know if I looked at the cookbook or I looked at something else. But yeah, he's Goblin Henchman. I think is the one who I always think about. Is like he just loves him some hex flowers. He's hex flower everything, and I've seen other folks do it. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with it. I always sometimes I look at it and go like I don't know if a hex flower is the best easiest way to do this, but look, it's people love their hex flowers, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying like I like my systems. What I've been doing is a lot is based on everything is D6s. I'm just trying to stick with D6s, and of course there are times where would be like, hey, wouldn't use a D4 or use it to whatever. But I'm kind of like, no, I want to do everything D6s. That's just my thing here. So I can certainly see how that I can feel that appeal of saying, you know what, I'm going to be the hex flower person, or I'm just gonna do everything hex flower. And for me, that's right now that's with me in D6s. I'm kind of doing everything D6s. So I want everything to be D6 or D66 or 2D6 or 3D6 is kind of how I'm structuring everything. And I'm sure at some point people are gonna go like, I don't know why I just didn't use those D20 or just didn't do whatever. And it's like, you know why? Because I wanted to use D6s. Priceman says a dozen hex flowers for Valentine's Day. Indeed, hex flowers for everyone. And look, who am I? Who am I of all people to argue against using hexes in any form? All right, so we have DEFCON levels, can refer to military preparedness, but can also refer to an intensifying, worsening, or other escalating change in the dungeon environment brought about by the interactions of the party. Every dungeon turn that passes, add one die to the dungeon pool. When the number of the dice in the dungeon pool matches or exceeds the DEFCON number, add the dungeon's HD and roll all the dice. For every 6 rolled, trigger a DEFCON event and mark it. When the number of events that have transpired at that DEFCON level match or exceed the DEFCON number, escalate the DEFCON level. Each time a dungeon's DEFCON level worsens, there is an accompanying escalation event. The escalation event is a perceptible phenomenon that signifies the change in the dungeon. It can be physical or sensory in nature, depending upon the context, or both, depending upon the context of the dungeon and what the DEFCON levels signify there. Examples include alarm bells ringing, mustering of troops, tremors or quakes, flooding passages, etc. Perkins got the idea from Planar Compass series. Oh, interesting. Okay. So we got our levels and basically what they mean. Actively preparing to. So we have, let's see, defenses raised, rating armed responses. preparing to evacuate, actively preparing to evacuate. What would be the step before if you're preparing to evacuate? What would it be? Would there be withdrawing to shelters? Maybe would be the next. Would that step first? Maybe here is preparing to evacuate. The evacuating um, non-essential. I hate to use personnel, but I guess it does work. Let's see. Total evacuation. I don't know. I don't know. What would you? What is it? I don't know. Just a general. No, no, general evacuation. I don't know. Evacuating. Evacuating. Let's see. Perkins says, I do not use the hex file for everything, mostly for background world stuff, weather, factions, city events, major world events like a volcanic eruption. Terrence says, the sounds of doors slamming shut. Yeah, pre evacuation. Yeah, I'm wondering what like, yeah. I think withdrawing to shelters probably works. I don't know. But I don't know what, I mean, I guess I could live pre evacuation. I'm not sure what pre evacuation is. Maybe it's better to be vague. Is that a thing? Pre evacuation? What's the difference between maybe shelter in place? Maybe? I'm not sure. Perkins says they started using a world calendar, but we just do not play often enough for it to have much value. Yeah, well, I don't know if it says you have to play that often, but it's to me the value comes in when enough times coming to where those calendar events are triggering, and then that those have real effects on the world kind of thing. Like, what does it mean that the seasons are going? And what does it mean that there are certain holidays? Do certain things happen on certain holidays? Something you can play with. Like if on certain holidays the Lord comes out amongst the people, the Lord of the realm or whatever, the local Lord comes around to the people and does something, then if there's shenanigans to be had with the Lord, that's a good time to plan it. Like, we know the Lord's going to show his face on this day. So on this day, we're going to do this stuff. And that becomes something that you can work a plot of a plot around. Or the next hunter's moon is coming, and on the hunter's moon, or the blood moon maybe is a better one. Then if we're in this special standing stones thing, that we can work some evil rituals. So that's what the evil ritual people are doing, kind of thing. So I don't necessarily say that, but you want to the time, like you want to have like the time wants you kind of want to matter, because some of the tension of that is, can we get to, we need to stop it, and we got to do this and that and the other to stop it. Can we do all that within the 3 weeks before the thing happens? And that. So I don't know that I would say that because you're not playing very often, that stuff doesn't matter. To me, it's more like internally, do those things matter? And if internally they matter, then I think they're totally workable. It's just if you're not playing very often, you may need to remind or figure out, whatever you do with your um like campaign, like, are you going to be someone who, however you keep track of, how everyone keeps track of what's happening in the campaign, because that's the one thing is people are going to forget. If you're only playing once every 3 weeks or something, you can't, your expectations and or just as a table of what are we doing, how are we remembering where we were and what day it was and all that stuff, and that might be incumbent then on you to say, hey, this is what's happening on that day. Remember, in 2 weeks, this is happening, and you probably definitely don't want to do that one-to-one time between sessions thing. Otherwise, you just everything will happen before your party's had a chance to respond. Oh, Brian Smith making the premature evacuation joke. Ha ha! Birdman. Terrence says the hounds are released. That's definitely something that some folks would do. All right, so now this table's basically done. I can turn that off, and then I can. There might be a way to do this not manually, but I don't know what it is. So I just do it manually. And at least it's a little bit of a prettier table. Not super pretty still. I would do things slightly different, but there we go. Okay, so we got our DEF CON levels. We have the meaning, we have the dungeon pool, we have the events before escalation. I still don't have anything here. Was I going to have a third column? I don't remember. So we have, okay, so wandering creature, environmental effect. I feel like that covers so much ground. What else could happen? I'm trying to think. Should I mean, I could just keep it really vague. I feel like that just covers so much. And it covers everything. Either it's a creature or it's an environmental effect. I'll need to get some inspiration. Things are not necessarily coming to mind on that score. I probably need to really I probably need to mention the pool. The dungeon pool a little bit more. So the other thing, I'm wondering is amongst the things that I'm wondering is we have through so if you think back, or if you're not aware, like in the do anything D6, we've got this element of buying successes through essentially accepting complications. I think one of the examples was, which was in a dungeon setting, you're trying to jump across a pit, you failed to make the jump, but you only needed one success. You needed, or I don't know, well, you were one success short, whether you had one, needed one, whatever. And so the GM might say to you, okay, you can make it across the pit, but you're going to make a heck ton of noise. And that's going to, um, that's going to, alert creatures around you, kind of thing. And so essentially what you're doing is that becomes basically, instead of rolling a wandering creature check or rolling to see if there is one, you've essentially bargained for one, right? So there are creatures around you. You've alerted, which means that there's, hey, that there are creatures around here. You've made noise. You're going to be bringing attention, which is essentially saying basically you're a wandering creature is now going to show it. Not potentially going to, but there's one in play now. You're putting a wandering creature in play, and then here we have potentially, as a DEF CON event, wandering creatures can come in. So I'm thinking that if we're doing this, we have these kind of multiple ways to get to wandering creatures. I don't need a separate wandering creature check because we're baking it into these other systems. As they're doing things, as they're going through, as they're acting, they are they're creating opportunities, or they're creating those wandering monster checks themselves, wandering creature checks. So I don't need to then roll for one separately. I can just use the fact that they're kind of baked into this system already. That's my thinking. I don't know. I'm curious if that will be easier or not so easy for people. I feel like, but I do think that on the I do think that I am asking folks to roll a bunch of dice. So if I'm going to be rolling a bunch of dice already, then why not try to eliminate bunches of dice rolling that I don't need? That makes sense. Like, I'm going to say, like, hey, you're going to roll at least five dice over here. Maybe then you don't need to roll an extra die over here. Does that make sense? Maybe I should put a sensory. Ugh. Maybe a sensory effect might be one. As I'm thinking of DEF CON events. So an environmental effect is actually something physically happening to the environment. Sensory effect is you kind of hear something. So to an example would be if an environmental effect is the ice breaking or cracking, the sensory effect is that sound like they like to do in movies and things. I just watched True Detective Night Country. I finished it last night. So, you're in the ice and you hear the kind of, but nothing's actually cracked yet. That will be the sensory effect. And maybe I wonder if that's kind of enough of those three things together. And I could even kind of weight them. And we could wait for it, depending on what your DEF CON level is somehow. Somehow my prince will come. Something like that. Maybe something to think about. Maybe. Maybe my baby. And then let's see. I was thinking about actions here. Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to, I'm sure I got to read through this and add some more stuff. But in terms of we get to actions, I'm really just thinking about what actions the party's taking. And I've been debating whether to list some actions or not. I don't know if it's helpful. You guys find it helpful to kind of break down things in terms of actions? And so, one of the things I was thinking about, and I'll just lay it out here. You guys can let me know if we have stuff. So, was roles, I guess, ultimately, right? So in a lot of people like in wilderness and your kind of travel thing to give people roles. Oh, you're the scout, you're the overwatch, you're the quartermaster. And I was wondering, you kind of do that anyway in the dungeon. Would it make sense to think of those things as formal roles in the dungeon? Like you're the tinkerer who's looking for traps and stuff. You're keeping watch. So you're listening for whatever. You're scouting ahead. You're, I don't know, the torch bearer type. I mean, often torch bearer is probably a weird one because I was thinking like, what would the quartermaster be in terms of the dungeon? But the usually, I mean, often, not always. I guess it depends. Really, I guess it really can depend. I always think like, aren't you employing a link boy or torch bearer kind of hireling to sit there and carry the torch for you? But I know oftentimes you're not. So I'll write these kind of down just to kind of have them. But I'm wondering like, what do we think about those and the kinds of the roles type things? Do you think in a dungeon they're worthwhile? Do they help with anything? I think they're often is like a standing operating procedure. Like you the halfling, you're up front. You're scouting, fighter guy, you're running, you're sort of running defense. Uh, you are doing this other thing. Like I said, I don't know if it's ultimately if people use it, but I do think we do fall into those roles when we're playing. I'm playing a fighter in a game. I'm going to generally be either in the front, depending, or I'm going to be in the back, kind of rear guard, protecting from the rear. But something like that. I'm going to be in one of those two roles, most likely, almost all the time. Perkins says, I tend to identify, not used to, I tend to identify the party roles myself, but it depends on the group. I put in my party PC notes who sort of does what. Yeah, I'm wondering if from running a dungeon standpoint, if it is helpful to formalize those roles or not. Oh, I saw Perkins thing and it first said Tang. Yeah, tank. Okay. Tank healer DPS from WoW. Yeah, I don't love the WoW. I don't love the MMO isms that have snuck in because I just don't like thinking about classes that way, especially not in the kind of OSR thing. I mean, I get it. Like, yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, it just I've gotten into see what's happened when I get into discussions with people who either grew up on those terms or they see the game in those terms is I think it gives them weird assumptions. So an example I can have is I've had gotten into conversations with folks who will insist on certain behaviors because I think they're focused on what it's like in an MMO. So people talk about tanks I'm the fighter. I'm tanking the whatever. And I'm like, okay, that's great. And then when I start talking about like, well, what if the thing goes around and hits the magic user? And they're like, but I'm the tank. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't mean anything. Like you're the tank. That's great. Yeah, I'm the fighter. I want to be standing toe to toe with whomever. That doesn't mean that whomever wants to stay toe to toe with me. And especially in old school kind of OSR type RPGs, TTRPGs anyway, there isn't anything that forces the owlbear to attach themselves to me if I can't enforce it. If I'm going to be the fighter and I'm going to make sure that the owlbear is only attacking me, then I need to make sure that we're in a spot where either the owlbear can't get around me or whatever it is. Like either we're in a hallway or something where I can position myself where there's no room for the owlbear to get past me, or we got to do something else. Maybe we could use different level, like whatever it is. But the owlbear doesn't just stick to me because I'm the tank. Like, no, I have to force that owlbear to hit me as opposed to going to doing something else. And you can argue about, oh, well, animals, blah, blah, whatever. I feel like sometimes people overplay that whole, but if it's an animal, it's just going to attack the strongest person. It's like, no, I would guess not, actually. I mean, most nature films that I watch, who are the lions or the sharks going after? They're going after the weaker ones. They're not going after the biggest buck. They're taking down the easiest thing they can possibly get, which is not going to be the fighter in their plate mail, and all armored up. It's going to be something squishy. So I find that when I'm loath to use those kinds of MMO type labels because they come with certain assumptions of play. Now, granted, something like fifth edition, you do have things. Fourth edition had it too, where you could mark stuff and put kind of disadvantage on people if they don't attack you as a tank or do whatever. And then at least it matches up a little bit more. It's still not the same as an MMO where you literally have the aggro and the thing basically will just attack you all day long without even a thought. But at least a little bit makes more sense. But especially in terms of games that don't have that stuff, I don't want to use this label because like I said, I think that I end up getting into people. I just remember one time someone just couldn't understand. It's like, but the fighter, and I'm like, yeah, the fighter's there, but it's like there's they don't have glue. The fighter's not super gluing themselves to that enemy. That enemy is free to make their own decision, and their decision might be the fighter's the last person I want to attack. I want to get rid of everyone else first. Heck, maybe even I can grab the wizard and put them in a kind of a coup de grace position and force the fighter to drop their sword. It's not just I need to attack the fighter because the fighter happens to be standing in front of me. Like, it's not that easy, not that simple all the time. Sometimes it can be, but Perkins says in OD&D, we really stuck to roles in the party: leader, caller, party sneak, major basher, mapper / cartographer. Yeah, I think those are more. Perkins, I like those a lot better, right? I'm not. I have never. I still have not really played in a game with a caller. Just haven't played in a big group, and just hasn't come up at the con games I've played. Uh, so I might almost think of like I wouldn't. I don't. I think it would be outside the scope of this document to think about. It might be fun to rotate that kind of caller. The caller responsibilities around the table. That's a really way that you can really equalize spotlight time if you want it, assuming that everybody kind of wants it. And so sometimes you have people, and that's whenever you get into conversations with people talking about the quiet player, I feel like you go back and forth between I'm making kind of assumptions here, and I guess I'm creating straw men, but I know other ways to really talk about it. Which you have your the one point of view is like, hey, the quiet voice is getting overwhelmed by people who are just talking louder, jump in first, and they get kind of left out. And I think that's I mean, obviously all these things can be true. But then you get I feel like this other thing comes in where it's like, no, the quiet player wants to be quiet. They just want to be in the background. And I think sometimes there are people who just have embraced that type of quiet versus the other type of quiet, which is they just really don't get a chance. And maybe they wouldn't like to, maybe they don't, but they don't get a chance there because regardless of whether they want to speak or they just don't get a chance. And I don't know what to do with different things because inevitably when you mention one, someone will mention the other one. If I start talking about the quiet player in terms of getting overridden, someone's going to jump in and say, no, 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 there are a bunch of quiet players. They just want to be quiet. They're just there hanging on. Like maybe people are. There's an endless variety of people. I can't hope to speak for them all, but a rotating kind of caller would help get everybody involved. And I think if there was a quiet player who legitimately just didn't want to talk, that just likes being in the background and just kind of hanging out, but doesn't want to do it, I feel like they could just pass. Right? Oh, hey, you're the caller now. No, thank you. Pass. Okay, but they'd get that choice. And if they did feel like they were, then this is their chance to be the leader type for a little bit. I mean, leader in terms of setting directions and things. I don't know if I would do it in a social. I think for social events, if I wanted, I would probably roll some kind of initiative, essentially a social initiative die, which I've done in the past and I liked. And then whoever won that initiative, and I don't even think I would have it be based on charisma, just a straight roll, because I just want to randomize who gets to be the first talker. Because again, it's a place where people can, there tend to be one person. I've been that person often enough who's like, I'm first person that speaks, so I'll kind of get to set the tone. And this way, it kind of forces everybody to wait for that die roll and see who comes up. But certainly for like your dungeon delving situation, I think on a rotating caller is a nice, almost democratization of the spotlight, if you will. Perkins says tank, just a shorthand for their own notes. Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. It's and look, if people use the terms all the time, I'm just wary of those kind of terms because for your own self, you know what you about it. Whenever I just hear people referring to fighters as tanks, part of me starts to think about like, how are they seeing it? And like I said, I've gotten enough of these discussions where the people who are referring to fighters as tanks treat them like MMO tanks with MMO tank abilities, even in systems that don't have it. Like literally, like in say BX or ODD, where there's not even opportunity attacks, where someone literally can just walk around you at their leisure in combat and go hit somebody else. That they're stuck with a like, well, why would they ever do that? I'm the tank kind of thing, right? But for your own notes, whatever reference works, works. But in terms of, for me anyway, in the kind of the discourse at large, it's a different concern. Perkins says they've been trying to use the index card RPG turns for initiative to give everyone a turn to act, talk, engage. Yeah, I mean, I forget what they do. Is it that they have one initiative that's basically rolling at all times? I don't know if I need all of that. But it's certainly an option. Doesn't Shadow Dark do something like that where they've like you've always got initiative running? I think those things are fine. I think what I like about the concept of the caller is that to me it, and again, I've never played it. I never played in a game with a caller. If there's an actual play that uses a caller, someone link to it to me so I at least check it out for a hot minute and see what it's like, see how they run it. My In my brain, when I think about the caller situation, I think about that the caller is getting consensus from the group to some degree and then making the statement. All right, let's huddle up for a minute. Okay, now this is what we're doing the next whatever amount of time until circumstances change or whatnot. To me, that's different a little bit than the rolling initiative because I mean, what can happen in rolling initiatives, what can happen anyway, where it's just somebody decides to do something goofy and you're like, no, wait, don't. And it's like they're off. And then you're like, okay, now it's not better or worse than another system because you can do that in just your regular systems. Somebody decides to go running off down the hallway screaming, running down the hallway screaming. But I look at the caller a little bit as like they're going to get some input. They're going to have the last say as to what happens and kind of set a tone. But it's also, I always feel like in there is some kind of, maybe it's not, I mean, I could be inventing something that doesn't exist, which is getting some kind of consensus or getting the vibe of what the group wants to do and then laying it out. So like we know what the group wants to do, and the caller is going to be basically putting that into the turn by turn instructions. Like we've all said, like, okay, here's what I'm going to do it. This, that, and they're like, we're all agreed, great. And then we come out of the huddle, and then the caller is until things get to the point where we need to rehuddle again, the caller is going through and kind of communicating that to the GM. But I could be totally wrong on that. But that's kind of my conception of the caller. Um, I don't know if I need like a running initiative, running initiative role. I'm okay with it being kind of free flowing most of the time. I would just like everybody involved. And I don't love the idea of like, look, as the GM, you're supposed to spotlight everybody in a certain scenes. Like, I don't want that. But I like tools that will kind of just mechanize that for me. Like, great, it's your turn. It's your turn. It's your turn. And that's what the initiative does. But maybe I suppose it's what the initiative does. I guess, yeah, I haven't tried it, so I don't know. But I kind of like the more free flowing bits. But I guess suppose what the initiative does do is it just force everybody to do everything, right? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? So I have done neither, but I feel like I'm more conceptually. I think I like the caller idea a little bit better, especially if it rotates at some however long, however short, hours, sessions, whatever. Perker says they use the caller when the group is getting chaotic, and as the DM, I have no clue what they want to do. Yeah, I think that's yeah. That to me, that's like a good. Like I feel like that was the original purpose when you're running sort of larger parties. You have this caller, and the caller can kind of brings a little bit of order out of chaos. And ENS Perkins, if they just pick someone randomly or had someone designated, and then in old days they picked had one for the whole session. Perkins says in recent times we're more mature and do not need people to get organized like when we were 12. There are some times I forgot I might have been playing in Daniel's one of Daniel's con games where I felt like we could have used a little huddle and caller kind of situation as opposed to what we had, which got a little bit. I mean, I know I was a little bit frustrated, at least at the moment, because it felt like certain people were going kind of rogue, and there was um, no way to kind of put a check on their rogueness. It was just like, well, that's happened, and I guess that's where the initiative thing where I feel like again, my conception of the caller is that you're getting a little huddle up consensus that I'm going to do it, as opposed to initiative where someone's just going to come out and do something, which again isn't bad because everyone's going to get a turn. But it also, if there is that person who's very impulsive in a way that's not always serves the group, you don't have any. There's no controls in that person because their initiative comes up, and if their first initiative, then they're just like blah blah. And you're like, okay, they're going to go do that. I guess. I guess they're going to go wake the dragon for giggles. All right, you know. But of course, your mileage may vary, your groups may vary, all that fun stuff. There is no spoon, as they say. Don't ask me who they is, but they say it. All right. So in terms of actions, I think we've got. I'm just going to write down some stuff here. We've got sort of investigation. This is your searching for stuff, right? Searching. We've got keeping watch. Ugh. Watch. Looking out for trouble. Yes, the the Leroy Jenkins effect for real, for sure. Yeah, there was somebody. It was one of those games where the one of the players was playing, and they were really nice, and they were having fun. But sometimes there's like that having fun that's just putting a little bit because especially. I mean, we say D&D doesn't have a win condition, but it often does, and especially when you're playing a con game, there is kind of that win condition of completing whatever the adventure is. And so when someone kind of at the beginning, the very beginning of the adventure is making these kind of I don't even want to say just suboptimal choices because I'm not trying to calculate I'm not a C3PO trying to figure out the odds of whatever happening, but are clearly making choices that could just blow up in our face within the first few minutes. And, they were basing it all on the fact that like, well, my guy's only got, 6 wisdom. So I'm going to just like do something super, super unwise kind of thing. And like, Daniel hadn't said anything. Daniel was the GM. He's like the GM didn't say that. He didn't. No one was put down like, "Whoa, you've got 6 wisdom, so start doing unwise things." Like this was just totally on this person's interpretation of that on their own. So they just kind of went and started doing stuff, and it's like, man, the just started. We started, and it felt like we were being kind of. It's like, wow, this is gonna be, and it ended up all working out, and nothing horrible happened. It, we had some close calls, but it was just kind of one of those things. Like I would have loved to just either like be able to huddle up on that. Maybe we could have talked that person out of going that direction or maybe turn them into a different direction, but, didn't have that opportunity. As Terrence says, never tell me the odds. I don't understand them. I like it. All right, so we got investigation. We got keeping watch. We've got, I call it tinkering for now. Tinkering, which would be essentially identifying, enabling traps. Obviously, there's moving. I think needs no Is there anything else? Investigation. So we're looking for stuff. We're keeping watch. We're tinkering. We're moving. Um, yes. There's at least one more, which would be, I think, Perkins asked if I've used Hazard System version 0.3. I have not. What is Perkins? What is Hazard System 0.3? Not familiar with it. What is it? Let's see. I see something here from, is this from the Necropraxis blog? Oh, I got that. We can look at that real quick. We can look at this. Why not? All right. So Perkins. How's this? Whoops. I meant to zoom this in, not zoom that in. Okay. So this is the hazard. Widen this out. The hazard system. This is from the Necropraxis blog from 2017. I'll link to it in the chat. There it is. If you can see it on the side there. The Hazard system is a gameplay engine for traditional role playing games designed to facilitate fictional consequences of player decision making while minimizing bookkeeping. Okay, significant changes. Oh, I see. So maybe we need to, let's go to, there's just a full version. Oh, below the divider. Okay. So we have the six-sided hazard die, setback, fatigue, expiration, locality, percept, advantage. So we would roll. All right, let me just read from the top. Hazard system. The six-sided hazard die deploys threats, manages the resources such as light, and keeps time. It is the engine that drives gameplay forward, ensuring that choices have consequences while minimizing bookkeeping. Take a turn, have a player roll the hazard die, and have the referee interpret the results relative to the current type turn. During a turn, each player may take one full action. The general form of the hazard die is, I just read out, setback on 1, 2, fatigue, 3, expiration, 4, locality, 5, percept, and 6, advantage. So setback could be an encounter. Fatigue could be a shortage. Shortage of, I guess, medicine. I guess you could roll if it's medicine, draft, like I guess water, famine or trust, expiration. We have the haven conditions. I don't know what that is, but some kind of positive kind of thing. Locality, local change, percept, foreshadowing, looming disaster, advantage, full recovery. I think I might have seen this ages ago. I'm doing something not dissimilar, but not the same either, which obviously is nice. Um, so there's some things that are kind of similar to what I'm doing. I'm not super interested. So this, my particular thing is particularly for dungeon delving and not kind of as an overarching like here's essential thing. I also have a hex crawling, which is after I finish this, I have to go back and kind of tweak my the hex crawling portion of this. It might be that after I do all that, if I once I have this dungeon crawling module done and I'm hex crawling modules done, there might be stuff from those I'll work back into something, and I could see there maybe from these two things, my versions of them as they stand now, then come up with something kind of like this. But obviously, I'm not. I'm doing a dice pool, and part of the do anything d6 is I just want sixes to be like success, whatever. So I'm more judging things a little bit differently. Some of this is certainly things that could be in terms of when we get into we go back to these DEF CON levels, like some of that works into these, right? You're at least the negative results could work kind of in here. I could definitely see that happening. I don't like the idea of I don't like the idea of resources expiring on the random roll to die. That's something that I just don't like. I don't like it in even though I haven't played Shadow Dark, I don't like that in Shadow Dark. I don't like it. I think there's so much randomness that players have to deal with in so many things. I want there to be things that players can just count on. Like your candle, your whatever, your candle torch, whatever you want to call it. I want that to be. I want you to know you got an hour. I don't want it to be. Oh, this time it went on 15 minutes. Oh, that time went on a half an hour. Like, or it's real time, so sometimes it can be the same thing. Like we've only spent 5 minutes of in-game time, but we spent an hour discussing things. So my torch just went out. Like I don't. I want you to be able to count on it. If you have X amount of food, you got X amount of food. I mean, sure, there might be something comes up, some kind of event that maybe you get, meal or whatever, some kind of bug in your food. That's fine on an off chance, but just not like randomly. Oh, now you had six medicine. Or if you have medicine like that, now you have three. Like I don't. I'm not. I'm just not in favor of that stuff. I think there are things that to me it is important that the players have kind of control that are sort of like I can count on these things. I can count on the sun rising in the morning and whatever. I can count on I went to bed with this much food and I did everything I need to do to take care of that food. When I wake up, I've got that much food and it doesn't magically weird stuff happen. So that's where I kind of end up departing from a bunch of these systems where they start working in things like that because I don't like them. As players, I find that stuff frustrating. I don't find it I think sometimes, and I don't want to say that this is what's happened in Necropraxis, but I think sometimes we get these GM things come up and they look at it purely from the GM side. Isn't this fun and exciting? Isn't this like ooh? But like as a player, it's not fun and exciting if I light a torch and it goes out. It's just like that. This stuff is not fun and exciting to me. It's frustrating, especially when because it's based on some of these roles. There's nothing I can do about it. I can't you know, I couldn't prep it in sealed containers. Like, what if no, no, it doesn't matter. It's gone. Like, what happened? I don't know. It's and granted, as a GM, I can come up with something, but there's always the thing of like, but the player's like, but I did whatever. It's like, sorry, man, it's gone. I just don't dig it. I don't find it fun. What I find fun is as a player when I'm able to I packed extra food and then that extra food comes in handy, or I do something. I'm like, yeah, you see, I anticipated that and I did that, and I think some of that anticipation, being able to figure out not necessarily the puzzle that's going on, but just like I needed the right tool for the job and I had that tool can really get undermined when just stuff just randomly just gets bounced away from you. And again, there's nothing I could do about it as a player. It's just, oh, you rolled the expiration die. Sorry. Like, nah, nah, not for me. No one likes the Haven mechanic. Well, let's see. Well, I'm not averse to seeing what's the Haven mechanic. Does he put the Haven mechanic somewhere? What is the Haven mechanic? See hazard system. I see hexagram. Maybe I'll look at it. Perkins says the amount of bookkeeping definitely impacts the overall gameplay and experience. I guess I do find that people get overly. I don't find the bookkeeping is actually that much. I feel like people make. Maybe I should say this. I think that often more of a deal is made about bookkeeping than really exists. How much bookkeeping are you doing in the average gaming session? Is it really that much? I think like it gets made up into this whole like, oh my gosh. But I remember, especially back in the day, using pen or paper and pencil sheets, erasing stuff, and like, oh, I gained this much experience to do that. Oh, spent 2 arrows, so I erased where I had 12 arrows, and now I have 11 arrows, like or 10 arrows, whatever it is. It's like it's I don't know. I don't think that's big. I mean, not that I'm asking people to, or I'm trying to indoctrinate people saying like more bookkeeping, but that was when we're doing everything analog. Now that you have, if you're playing on a VTT, or even if you're just using Excel, that you can really just automate this stuff. Like, okay, click up or down. I don't know. I feel like I feel like that when the bookkeeping was really averse is when we didn't have all these tools and we were doing it more by hand, and that's when we could have used some of the more easier some of the maybe more streamlined bookkeeping. Even then, it wasn't that big a deal. And like in something like D&D, like how much bookkeeping are you doing? Crossing off the spells you used or putting a little tick box by it? Like I don't know. Like what's oh, I've got 5 days worth of rations. Now I have four. Like how many? I'm not even doing it that often. Like okay, maybe I'm doing that. I'm clicking that off once a session or whatever. Like how many days did we use? We're traveling. Oh yeah, we used 3 days. Okay, so I'm down 3 days of rations. Like okay, I don't know. I don't know. Like I don't obviously people have things that affect them more, but I've always felt like that it almost gets a bad rap. Like the resource tracking to me is like what are we like maybe just people are just playing vastly different, but I don't know how much bookkeeping most folks are doing on average in their games, but it really doesn't feel like a ton. Perkins says we tracked a lot of details like number of arrows, rations, health, fatigue. Yeah, but Perkins, but outside of okay, so in combat you're tracking your health, and then maybe at the end of the combat or you're tracking down your arrows. But like how much? But like the amount of bookkeeping, it's not intense bookkeeping. It's I have 16 hit points. I took points of damage. Now I have hit points left. Like the math is very simple and fast. I had 12 arrows. I've shot an arrow. Now I've got 11 arrows. Like it's not, and like the amount of time it takes to do that if you're doing combat, like after my turn, okay, on my turn, I tick off an arrow because I shot an arrow. On the monster's turn, I tick off those 4 hit points or whatever damage they did. Like it's not like there's a ton of I just don't feel like it's a ton of bookkeeping, but that may just be me. Um it definitely is a different feel than random D6 expiration for sure. No doubt. I just for me, I like the fact that I can count on what I brought and didn't bring. But obviously, at a table, if my players were saying to me, "Hey, man, we love this game, but we just can't stand the bookkeeping that exists. Can we do something about it?" I could say, "Hey, this is an option." Kind of usage die type mechanics is certainly a method. Not one that I appreciate, but I would, if they're like, "We want to use usage dice because we don't want to track it," I'm like, "Yeah, fair. Let's do it." But I'm gonna, I'll just say like, you just be ready for some potentially oddball results when you stock a D20 worth of rations and it's down to D8 because you rolled unluckily a couple times. Yeah, Perkins says getting down to 1 arrow is intense. Yeah, and that's part of also why I dislike some of that stuff because I like the intensity of like I've got 1 arrow, so I gotta do something. Yeah, I actually dig that. Okay, sorry, I didn't want. There's a download section. Maybe there's this Haven thing will show up there. Hazard system. I see that. Stonehell. Helheim. Maybe I just need to look up. Let me look up Haven system here because I don't. Is Haven system also Necropraxis? Is that my or is that from someone else? Someone who knows. 'Cause I'm curious about it now. Perkins, no worries. Sometimes it's good to be derailed. You get ideas. I don't see it. The interesting thing with this hazard system is, I guess it's was from 2017. It's only version point 3, and I guess that hasn't really gotten past there. Interestingly enough, but I guess he's not blogging too much anymore. Always fascinating to watch the kind of rise up and down things of different blogs and bloggers. Like in Necropraxis in 2013, wow, or 10 years ago, 158. I mean, actually down. It went from 70 to 281, 158. 2022, the whole year just and 2021 just four. Um, I don't see where the Haven stuff is though. I looked on. I don't. Where's where's the Havening? Oh, is it Haven Turns? Am I looking for the wrong things? It just seems to come up the is that Haven Turn, Haven Condition. I don't know. 3 modes, Haven. What's a Haven Condition though? They do have disasters. Maybe I just maybe okay, so I just didn't I needed to just scroll down. I thought it was a separate thing. I guess I just need to scroll down. Okay. Haven turns represent several days or weeks of rest or recovery. Free Haven moves, advance, level up, prepare spells, recover, recruit, resupply. Full Haven moves, craft gear, scribe, scroll, conduct research. Haven conditions: I see curse, famine, pestilence, shortage, siege, winter. Okay, okay, so you get to. I got you now. Yep. No, I like that. I like that. I mean, I've thought about things similar, right? Like, what can you do? Like, what do you? It's like your domain sort of thing, right? Or like you're in Rivendell. What can you do? That's cool. It'd be interesting. I would have thought maybe there'd be some positive haven conditions. They're all bad. Um, I would maybe. What is a positive haven turn interpretation? Full recovery. Okay. Okay. Cool. Cool. Yeah, I could definitely once I get to maybe my more unified thing. Or if I do like a domains thing, I could see some of that being useful. But yeah, mine would always work differently because, like I said, the sixes, and I would probably. I think my concept of some of that stuff would be like players would roll for their sort of their stuff, um, and not have it be like a world thing for some of it anyway. Perkins says, I think the idea to stay in game turns so you can give players a time frame like days, weeks, months. Yep, absolutely. Though I think it can be, like I'm also okay with it being sort of free flowing. I think there are advantages to both. So, for instance, in the game I'm playing in, we're currently in a downtime period, and the amount of time it's taking, we could have done it in terms of turns, and maybe that would be, in some ways, that would be helpful because then we might have more of a cost thing of if we take three, say Haven turns, we'll incur potentially some more setbacks as opposed to two Haven turns, whatever. That's definitely one way to do it. But we're just doing it like it's going to take so many weeks. Okay, great. We want to do that, or like, ooh, that's a little bit too long, kind of whatever. I think they would both work. In our case, we don't have a stronghold, something, so we don't have something to worry about in terms of. I mean, I suppose the Haven doesn't have to be yours specifically. It could be, well, like I said, Rivendell or some other place. Like, oh, you're in Bree or somewhere that's relatively safe, but still, like something bad could happen. But I feel like I would want to use that a lot for like when you're at your kind of particular, if you had your own stronghold or something, where you'd kind of be. But yeah, I like it. I mean, it's a nice way of unifying some things that we tend to do more ad hoc. All right, so I got about maybe 15 more minutes. I feel like maybe this would work for DEF CON events. I'm trying to think what else it could be. I mean, I suppose I could do we could do, let's see. I feel like the DEF CON events are kind of similar to the sort of environmental effect covers a lot of ground. Sensory effect covers a lot of ground. I don't know. Do I need one more? I don't know. I might have to fiddle with that in my brain just a touch. Squeeze this down. Squeeze this one down too. I can pop this out a little bit. There we go. Okay. So we have our levels, what they mean. So you're either sheltering in place, or you're alerted, or you're raising your defenses and readying armed. Well, you're raising defenses anyway, but you're readying armed responses, or you're sheltering in place. You're actively searching, or you're preparing to evacuate. You're preparing for your all-out battle, or you're evacuating kind of non-essential personnel. You're conducting your all-out battle, or you're evacuating your remaining personnel, and then either you've been completely destroyed or you've abandoned the dungeon. That's a 0. That 0 I'll have to write up a little bit because getting to DEFCON 0 is something special. You don't just that's not an automatic. That would be like either you set a timer, like a bomb. Okay, when this happens, now suddenly the bomb is going, and that's where you tick off turns, or it could be the results of player actions, or it could be whatever. Perkins says, "Thanks for the live stream. Like where you're going with the escalations." Oh, cool. Well, thanks. I'm glad you're digging it. Hopefully, pretty soon. I feel like, I mean, I'll have to clean all this stuff up But see you around, Perkins. I'll hopefully be done soon. But I did get some stuff. I feel like I got some good stuff done. The last piece might be the actions. Let's see. Investigating is searching. Let's see. Searching, keeping watch, identifying disabling traps, moving. Moving you kind of get for free. So maybe I won't take that out as I mean I don't need that as a move as a thing. Is there anything else? What else are we doing? Keeping watch, tinkering. I guess I'll do torch bearing. Maybe that will work. We'll make these. Yeah. All right. So we got investigating. Keeping watch. I don't know if tinkering's the right word there, but I'm just going to use it for right now. If I think of something better, I will think of it. All right, not all actions are challenges. A challenge, as discussed in 20D6, is an action that poses a significant, interesting struggle to perform. So you might not, not everything has to be a challenge, right? Not all actions will meet those requirements. However, whether they require adjudication or not, they still cost time. So basically, I was trying to break down, like if we were running a dungeon, right? What are your actions? What actions being what is the parties doing? And I'm trying to just again, I'm not paving new ground here. It's something that BX always things say, but I'm kind of restating it because sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle. Anytime the party takes an action, takes a turn. Actually, then case moving does take a turn, right? Moving. Um, traveling in the dungeon. Right. So all these things take a turn to do. And I am not. I think part of that thing is just we're kind of working at a certain level of abstraction where I just find it much easier not to try to sit there and have discussions of how long does this take? Oh, it doesn't take that long. Like it just all takes turns. If it works easier just to just tell everybody turns and not even worry about how much time a turn is, maybe that's easier. Just say it's turns. The torch bearing is not really a maybe that's not really an action. You're just holding the torch. That's a roll maybe, but not an action. Challenge. Okay. Yeah, so I think that works. It's really what like I said, for running a dungeon, I just want to give all right, here are kind of the main things. I'm not trying to be super detailed. I'm trying to give that kind of like what are the broad categories that things fall into. You're searching and interacting with the dungeon, looking out for trouble, identifying assailing traps, traveling. And methinks that's probably a good. I think that covers everything. I don't know if there's something else. Um, I mean, tinkering. I think can. I have it here just as traps, but I think it's kind of any mechanisms dealing with. But I think tinkering would also be, they like, oh, I'm gonna, I'm gonna use some, what do you call it, iron spikes. I'm gonna spike a door shut or spike a door open. That would also be kind of tinkering. Maybe I'll such as traps, doors. There we go. Maybe that's a better. interacting with dungeon mechanisms such as traps, doors, etc. You're tinkering. You're doing a little MacGyvering. You're doing a little MacGyvering, and that's what you get. All right, I think that's a good list. Oops, no, I don't need you. Here we go. If it is helpful, it is helpful to place party members into roles. Generalize the role from the tasks that the character tends to perform. Like perfume, perform. All right, so then we could have go back into bullets. Let's see. What would be the what would be the word for let's see. So we've got protection, watch, scout is investigates. The mechanic. Are there any other roles here? We have the protection, keeps watch. Scout investigates. Tinkers. The torchbearer sheds light and aids the other characters. And then yeah, we'll throw the caller in there, right? The caller in the caller seeks consensus from the party and communicates actions to the referee. I'll throw it in there. I'm gonna call it the captain. I'm not gonna call it the caller. Oh, captain, my captain. I think that sounds pretty good. So what are I guess what am I doing with these things? I think it is clear to me that especially now we cannot say where folks are getting into say the kind of play. Like I don't know, for example, who's going to end up with which rules. I earlier today I was on Discord and someone was trying to kind of grok Scarlet Heroes and some of their generation their I think it was dungeon generation tables and they were having a really really hard time. A really hard time. And I think folks were trying to help. Folks were trying to be helpful, but it took one person that had a really deep knowledge of Scarlet Heroes. 'Cause I think they're actively developing stuff, either using Scarlet Heroes or for Scarlet Heroes or whatever. So they had all the knowledge they needed. But a lot of other folks, myself included, were in there trying in our own ways to help this particular person, but we were not particularly successful. And I think a big reason for that was that we were coming at it as if they were from the same background in terms of we are, meaning read a lot of systems, having access to a lot of stuff, kind of like used to looking at tables and interpreting them. I even put out a short earlier on YouTube, and I think on yeah, it's been on most of the social media. I threw it out there because I was reminded at the end of that thing, like, hey, put explanation, like put a little instructions on how your tables work. And I don't know if Scarlet Heroes has it or doesn't have it, but just put it out there because this person was just having a lot of trouble, and part of it was, or they didn't have this context that a lot of the other people in this particular Discord shared in terms of how things work. So we're all kind of getting frustrated with them. I think they're getting frustrated with us because we're almost talking cross purposes. They didn't, and I remember at one point someone was like, "Well, just use another book. Like if you're not getting if this part of Scarlet Heroes doesn't make sense, use another book." And the guy's like, "What book?" Or I say, "Guy," I'm not sure. They were like, "What book?" And I think I chimed in. I'm like, well, I said, well, for Dungeon Generation, there's a bunch." And he's like, "Well, and I get that that can probably that name itself is not very helpful, right? A bunch because it only forces them to ask questions like, well, how about can you give me some names?" So then I replied, well, basically every DMG. I'm sure there's exceptions, but just about all the D&D DMGs of the AD&D line or post whatever 3.0, just the regular just D&D line have some kind of dungeon generator in them. And their response is like, I don't think I have any of those, right? Which right there is just like, phew, like they're different. They're coming at it from a different place. I now, I don't know how they got to Scarlet Heroes. Like, well, what was their entry point to Scarlet Heroes? What was their entry point? Because this is an OSR Discord. Like, what was their entry point in the OSR? Where is it? But it clearly wasn't from what a lot of folks maybe have been, where they end up going like figuring out, oh, I want to do OSR, then going back and reading the retro clones or those books or something. Like people are coming at us from who knows? For all I know, they maybe found their way into Mork Borg and then into this or the some other like I don't know how they got here. And so I find like with that situation of well, now it makes a lot more sense to me why they're not getting what we're trying to put out there because we're talking to them like they are us who have been sort of sitting in the OSR soup for a long time that have like oodles of PDFs and have all this stuff and have been looking at these kinds of tables and the methods that OSR books tend to do things for eons now. And so, how can this not make sense? And if this doesn't make sense, then whatever. Whereas this person didn't have any of that context, clearly. Now, I don't know what context they do have. That'd be maybe an interesting conversation. But it was clearly very different. So I say all that to say, if it seems like if I'm writing this down, like why the heck are you writing this down? Everybody knows that. I think we're getting to the point, maybe we've already been there where people don't know this stuff. That whereas before I might have said a few years ago, BX and everybody in the OSR had played some version of BX, whether it's Lamentations or OSE or whatever, that, oh, of course, like BX. Why do I need to write down what they wrote down already? Everybody knows. Everybody knows. Everybody doesn't know. Everybody does not know. And I think by just kind of restating it, hopefully for folks that, and like I said, for me, like this stuff's going on itch, and I don't know how people are going to get a hold of it or where they're going to see it from, but it might very well not be from a place of, I already know a bunch of OSR stuff. So I'm spending some portion of page count of space on the page working, writing these things out to someone who is experienced with dungeon crawling. It's like it's probably not helpful at all. May even be counterproductive. I don't know. However, there might be a lot of people who are new who might not be coming through reading all the books like maybe we have in the past. That's just gonna be like, oh my gosh, this makes sense to me, or I'm coming from fifth edition and kind of having sort of even just putting it in somewhat terms that might mirror in some way how 5e works. Oh, that now that suddenly I suddenly get it now, whereas I didn't do it before. Terrence says the loop to loop played by the powered by the apocalypse pipeline. Uh, who knows? Maybe one never knows. And so part of what I'm trying to do with this module is try to kind of I am restating some sort of basic stuff, dungeon turns, like a turn around, right? Like these kind of things. Hopefully I'm adding a little bit on top of it with like the or stating things at least in a different little bit different way, but hopefully it will make sense because kind of the point, I guess, of as I'm sort of winding down today of kind of bringing around first full circles. Part of this whole thing is to say you can take this, you can drop it in if you're confused or the system you're using doesn't have good and a lot of systems they don't necessarily cover all this stuff because that's not their purpose. That's sometimes I think it can be frustrating, but sometimes you just got to go in knowing what it is. Or sometimes you buy a system or a dungeon to play, and that dungeon just has assumptions. They might even tell you what those assumptions are up front. Hey, this is my assumptions are you have all this kind of stuff, so I'm not giving you X, Y, and Z because I'm assuming you're bringing that with you. But of course, sometimes somebody's going to get that, and they're not going to have that stuff. And like my kind of idea with this is that you can take this, use it alone, use it with the other system, be like, yeah, okay, well, that doesn't have what I want, but oh, I can just drop this kind of on top of it, and I can play my game. Um, hope everyone. I'm almost at 2.5 hours. So I feel like that's a good stopping point for me. I'm trying to think. If there's anything else anyone folks got before I go? I don't know if it's. I will probably go through something when I have more of the. When I feel like this draft is kind of finished, I'll probably do another stream and run through it. I might do some more of these kind of working streams this week because I find that they help me just kind of stay focused, stay organized, and kind of not necessarily. I'm not. I don't know. I see some people who are able to just work and have the chat on and just kind of go. I'm not at that spot. I guess I feel like I get into an explainer kind of mode, but as I've said in the past, I think the explaining stuff actually helps me a lot because it clarifies stuff. It kind of helps me work through things. So even though oftentimes in these streams I don't accomplish a lot in terms of word count, I didn't just sit here and type, and you guys just didn't watch me kind of type away. But what I did do is by explaining, by kind of working through stuff, it kind of helps like those gets those gears set. But unless anyone has any thoughts, I think I'm gonna close down the office. I'm gonna turn off the lights, shut the curtains for the moment. Um, give it a rest. Come back to it a little bit later. I feel like on my to-do list, I need to finish and I get the DEF CON thing polished up a little bit. Maybe mention a little bit more about the pool, and then I think I'll have all the pieces for the kind of running the dungeon because I'm hoping it'll just be like I can just kind of set up and just lay out sort of here's your clockwork chronology or procedure for running the dungeon that'll be kind of easy and make sense, but have some depth to it and have some stuff you can do because that's kind of what I want. But we'll see how that works. All right, folks. Have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Thanks so much for all your help and for hanging out and all the support and all the yada yada yada. Game on, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye now.